Welcome to ReFocus, a podcast that helps you find your focus to build a thriving creative career in the music industry. I'm your host, Rosalyn Dennett. Hello and welcome to ReFocus. Our guest today is Saskia Tomkins. Saskia is a master musician of violin, viola, cello, and Nyckelharpa. She's an educator and a composer, UK-born, who's classically trained with a folk background and a B.A. honors in jazz music. She's an All-Britain Champion Irish Fiddler and in 2022 received an award for services to Irish music in Canada. Over the years, Saskia has worked with many musicians, including the Chieftains, Sultans of String, Jabbour, Medusa, and many other fabulous acts, along with her husband, Stefan Hannigan, and son, Oisin Hannigan. Welcome, Saskia. How are you doing?
Hi, Rosalyn. I'm great. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
You are calling from a bit of a unique place right now. Can you tell folks where you're calling in from?
I can. I'm calling in from Wolfe Island, so the hotel in Wolfe Island, which is just off the coast of Kingston, Ontario. I did a gig with my band Medusa last night. We're still here because the ferry only comes once an hour, so you can't get off the island until said ferry. So we're hanging here to do this interview. And there's songwriting workshops going on, and there's random people, and we've had a session this morning, an old time session, and it's busy and crazy and wonderful.
Sounds like a magical musical spot. So you're performing with Medusa. You perform with all sorts of acts, though, and I feel like you're a busy musician. You gig and work a lot, especially in the live space, and I know you record as well. What has it been like for you kind of getting back on the road post-pandemic? What are the vibes out there emerging back into the live world?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the pandemic was 20 years ago now, because I've done so many gigs, because I do so many different types of music with so many different bands and musicians and artists, that it feels like everybody's desperate for music again. So there's twice as much work as there was before. That's what it feels like. And for that, I'm really grateful. But the coming back into it from the pandemic, my first couple of concerts, I've been performing since I was 11, 12, and I didn't know that I got nervous until my first couple of gigs after the pandemic. And I was like, I got terrible stage fright, which really shocked me because I've never had it before. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I was like, okay, performing is a practice thing, same as anything else. That was very interesting. While I was having a meltdown, I was also, that bit of myself was watching me and laughing at myself, going, this will serve you right. And you're so arrogant. The first one, I told the audience, I'm sorry I have bow shake, and I'm sorry I'm currently crying and shaking, but this is how it is. And they were all lovely, and it sorted itself out, but it's quite nice to be back.
I remember the first concert I went to and the first conference I went to. It was so emotionally overwhelming. I cried at everything. I also had like 2 babies, so I feel like during the pandemic, and I feel like that made me cry. I also cry at like Tim Hortons commercials now, so whatever.
Yeah, you have babies and your emotions are never the same. Been there.
That's really interesting to experience those feelings for the first time, that I feel like can be kind of ubiquitous for performing artists, to feel that kind of nervousness. How did you work through?
I put my bow on the strings and took a deep breath and hoped for the best, and eventually it dissipated. Because I was so open with the audience, especially the first concert, I had quite a few of the audience coming up to me afterwards and thanking me for my honesty and my openness, because they experienced that in whatever field they're in. And I also had musicians who were at the concert coming up and saying, it's really nice to hear that you also can struggle with that. But I realized that I've always thought of the stage as just being my natural habitat. And when you take yourself out of the land for a while, out of that space for a while, it's almost sort of a PTSD thing. I don't know. It was interesting. It's almost a panic thing.
Yeah, I mean, if that's your natural habitat, to be removed from it, forcibly removed from it for 2 years, that must have been tough.
There's a lot of us in the same boat, I think. But it's fantastic to be performing again. And it's interesting because it surprises me, there's still audience members who come who say, this is my first concert. I've just decided it's time. I'm ready to go out again and reintroduce myself to the world. And I find that extraordinary. Well, we've been living with this fear for so long, and I'm still careful. I got COVID 2 months ago for the first time, which was kind of crappy, but there's still a real fear out there and cautiousness, and audiences are coming back, but they're still not back up to par. The gigs are there, but the audiences aren't quite there yet. But it's coming. It's coming.
It's neat that folks appreciated, or like we're vocally appreciating that vulnerability. You know, it's one of the reasons why we started doing this podcast, was to kind of tap into, or maybe kind of ride this wave that people are being more open about talking about the struggles, or open to being a bit more vulnerable. Because certainly the veneer of how good things look online or on social media and stuff, and it's really neat to kind of crack it a bit and see what's underneath. I think a lot of folks appreciate hearing about that from people.
Yeah, that's true. And also, you were saying about performances you went to afterwards, you cried, and it might be because you had babies, but I've seen a lot of audience members crying who haven't got babies, or probably had babies 30 years ago. They're allowing themselves to be, vulnerable. And also the music just hits. I mean, you and I, we've got music. We've always had music. So playing in your bedroom or playing in your living room alone, it's kind of a little depressing, but we've still got that music thing. But a lot of people, they didn't have that.
Yeah, and it's also just nice to watch other people and enjoy other people making it and creating. And
one of the things I realized that it really hit home was performing again in front of an audience. You realize that the audience is so much part of the performance, because there's an energy sharing, a two-way thing, and it's so almost visceral, but it's really easy to take these things for granted and not notice. But after the pandemic, I noticed it's so strong, and it's a two-way sharing. It's not just the musicians giving the audience a gift. The audience are also giving the gift of their energy and their focus and their enthusiasm. Yeah, it's quite a beautiful thing, and that's my drug. That's my drug of choice.
So then, how do you mitigate those highs and lows then, now that you're back on the road, getting the highs from the audience and feeling all those good feelings? How are you mitigating that?
Oh, that's such a tough question. The higher the highs, the lower the lows, right? Most of the time, I'm so busy that my highs it's like a washing line. You hang your laundry on the line and it goes to the next clothes peg of a high. And most of the time I manage to do that. But I do find that I don't have as much energy as I used to. And I'm sure it's because I floated around in my garden for 2 years going, oh, look at the butterflies. And I wasn't in fifth gear. Fifth gear is now really hard to get to. And I'm not as good as sustaining it as I used to be. So I do a lot of sleeping. Sleeping seems to work, and floating around in my garden, which is a good thing. But I found as well that I struggle a bit with the darker side now, which I always manage to smooth over. And my emotions are much rawer than they used to be, and less controllable than they used to be. So if I have gigs where I'm on the high and you can't sleep because you're at that place, and then you have to sleep in the next day, and then if there's nothing for a few days, I find I get very sad. But I allow myself to cry. I allow myself to be quiet. I allow myself to feel those feels, because I know they're transitional. It's not permanent. My heart thinks it's permanent, but my brain knows that it's not. It's only temporary. So it's like, okay, let's just sit in this for a bit. Okay, time to move on. Yeah.
And you have a brilliant, wonderful musical family.
That's my support network as well. And I have a grandchild now, which really helps as well. You can't be sad around babies.
What's it been like? Are your kids musical?
So Oshin, he's a phenomenal percussionist, and he now runs a really lovely recording studio with Noah Sullivan in Montreal. And he's gigging with lots of people as well. And then Ella is the one with the baby, and she's a singer, but she's a model, currently dealing with almost a year-old baby now. And then Aisha is my 19-year-old, and she's recently said, oh, I've been fighting against being a musician, but I realized that I'm a musician. She's an amazing singer and plays guitar and writes songs. But she's only recently come back to that. because she's realized that her boyfriend's a musician and her two best friends are singer-songwriters, and all these things keep heading her back onto that path. And she said, I can't fight it anymore, Mum. This is just who I am. It's like, yes!
Finally.
Finally. The teenage years have gone. Thank goodness for that. Yeah. So and obviously Stefan, who's my husband, who's Stefan Hannigan, who's a really amazing musician and in the arts. I have a really good support network. I think you breed your own tribe. You'll find that when your kids get older.
I can't wait for the next time I see your family band, now that you might have new members in it. That's exciting.
Yeah, new old members, I suppose they rejoin.
That's a neat dynamic to be in. I joked about this with Angelique Francis, who has a family band, and she has more siblings that aren't yet in the band. And I joked about, oh, well, was there pressure? Like, are they going to be disappointed if one's a doctor or something? And no, but it's neat but it's kind of funny that that's kind of ubiquitous throughout these musical families in some ways, that you had a daughter that like fought against it. Like that was rebelling. Not being a musician was was rebelling against the family order, you know?
Yes, yeah. Oshin did that as well, just to let you know. He did it when he was younger. Yeah, he was going to become a professional video gamer. And then we sat down and talked once about what life really means and what's really important. And if that's what you want to do, absolutely. And then I said, but you've got to make a decision and stick and work towards it. And then, yeah, the penny dropped. He went, yeah. He was trying not to be his dad. But then one day he went, yeah, I'm myself, but I'm like Dad and I can't fight it anymore. And the world is grateful for that.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. But it's like in the old days, if your father was a fisherman, you would go into the fishing industry. If they were a baker, you'd go into baking. It was just family vocation. And musicians are the same, but it happens less in this day and age. But I think the music world is still pretty much like that.
Well, speaking of family, the piece that was created out of the artist in residency at Folk Alliance, really, really incredible. There's a video, you can check it out online, and we'll link to it in the notes. But yeah, speaking of crying, I wept watching the video. It's really impactful and an emotional story. What was it like to share that journey with the public and tell folks the story of your family?
It was really tough. It was really tough. It was an amazing thing to do. It was an incredible thing to do and very healing for myself and my family, my kids and my mother, especially, well, and me as well. And we've all traveled a lot since then within ourselves and our growth. But it was to bare my soul, knowing that a lot of people would see it. I'm actually a very private person. And I think some of that comes from when you come from a family that has been so traumatized by their past and by keeping secrets. Secrets are so damaging. And when you're brought up where secrets are the norm, you can't talk about things, you can't tell anybody, you've got to keep it going. You end up shutting everything in. So although I think of myself as a very open person, I'm actually very secretive and private. So that was like, you can go so far and then never see anything underneath that. But even I didn't know really what was underneath that. So that I had to dig deep into the well. But what's happened is that I feel like my insides, and I've seen it with my kids and my mum, that churning up, and it's allowed all those deep scars to finally heal over. And it's been the most extraordinary journey. I mean, the gift that Folk Alliance gave me, they probably don't really know, but the gift they gave me is the most extraordinary gift. That's, yeah. Oh. And because of that, we've met family on my Black family side. So for listeners who don't know, my mother was the child of a white English woman and a Black American GI. And there was lots and lots of complications in there. And after the war, the government tidied up the brown babies, as they're called, and put them in children's homes. So there's a lot of stuff, parallels to Canada with the Indigenous stuff. So it's been incredibly healing and amazing. And it still goes on. There's a documentary organisation that are interested. I don't know if it'll happen, but they're talking about making a full-length documentary, which is super exciting.
Yeah, that's neat that it's led to new opportunities too, to connect with more family.
Yeah, it's extraordinary family. I didn't know. who didn't know us, knew nothing about us. And because both my mum and myself have had the black side of us erased in terms of our upbringing and our culture and everything else, it's really extraordinary to be in touch with that. And there's this kind of acknowledging, this is part of me, this is part of who I am. It's mind-blowing. There's this thing that you go, well, I'm as I say in the video, I'm brown on the outside, but I'm white on the inside, just because of the way I was brought up. But it's still, and my mum's the same, but it still hasn't quite got around to saying that she's black yet, even though she's half black. But my kids all now say that their grandmother's black, which wouldn't have happened at all. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. Has that new framing of your identity, has any of that seeped in to your music and how you're approaching your instruments?
I've always played blues, and I've done a lot of sort of blues and Creole music in the past, but I've always felt like it didn't belong to me. Just the same as I don't think the Irish belongs to me, even though I'm a really good Irish fiddler, because I'm not Irish, and you get this. It's an identity crisis thing that happens on a daily basis and always has done. But now I'm coming to the point where I go, no, this is my music. This is part of who I am. And there's a thing that it kind of settles. It's settled in me. And I'm more me than I've ever been, which is, I like me. It's a good place to be. But it's coming out in the music. And I'm doing over the pandemic, I did a lot of writing before I made the video. I was doing a lot of composing, sort of more classical stuff. It's just the way that it was coming out. But I've now been listening to a lot of black and mixed race classical composers. I'm going on an explore, on a journey to see how they use their own music, their own identity and culture within classical idiom. So I don't know where it's going to lead, but it's a really interesting journey.
Love to just explore for even a moment, like how, as you brought up that feeling of like, oh, I play Irish music, but I don't feel like that belongs to me. And it's someone who I love traditional music so much, of all different kinds, and have wrestled with those same feelings of playing different music if you're not from that culture. What's your approach been like to that? I mean, I feel like I've seen you play in a whole bunch of different genres, and you're such a brilliant musician that way, that you're able to dance between them really seamlessly, but also really authentically. What's usually your approach to learning different styles? And
I had a conversation last night with somebody here on the island who's she's put on an exhibition of Black diaspora, African diaspora art. And we had this big conversation about cultural appropriation in the arts, and how visual artists tend to be really worried about cultural appropriation, whereas musicians tend not to be, because music since the beginning of time has always borrowed from other places. Or a musician will go and go, hey, hear something, and go, oh, I love that. So they want to learn it because it's interesting and it informs them as a musician. So that's where I'm at. I think as long as you honor a tradition and really, really listen to it and really take from it where is it actually coming from, rather than, as in the Irish world, rather than just playing the Irish washerwoman going, hey, I play Irish music, which I've seen. I mean, it happens in every tradition. But if you actually really listen and immerse yourself in that music to figure out what is the essence, what actually makes that music, what's the essence of it, then once you've learned that and you've been able to recreate that, then you can take it where you want, because you're honoring that tradition, but you're then giving it life. You're not keeping it in a museum, which is always, nobody wants music covered in dust. It doesn't work. So that's my thing. And also I get excited by things. I hear a new type of band playing, or a fiddler playing, or whatever it is, from wherever in the world, and I just get totally excited by it, and I want to know everything there is about it. And then suddenly something else will come up, and squirrel, I've pivoted because I want that one. And then at some point I'll go, oh, back to that one again. That's how I am.
But does that have to do with a bit of your neurodiversity too, like the way that you
Oh,
learn and learn
totally.
music?
Totally. It's recently discovered that I've been told for years that I'm ADHD, but I used to laugh it off until recently, like many artists are going, "Oh, that's me." And yeah, so true that type of hyper focus on one thing for a while, and then it's completely forgotten about because there's a hyper focus on something else more interesting has come along, or as interesting. And then at some point you'll hear something, you go, "Hey, I was doing that. Oh, I love that." And then you're back to it again. And that's definitely a neurodiverse brain. It's definitely not a neurotypical brain. But it's also the same brain that forgets to eat lunch because they're into
Yes.
something. Yeah.
I wonder if during the pandemic there were, I think this might be not necessarily a musician thing, maybe it's broader than that, but a lot of people having that time to do that work and kind of get to know themselves a little bit better. And
I think the
yeah,
pandemic's done that. Yeah, that time, alone time, has done it to a lot of people, which is why people are quitting their jobs everywhere and going off to be pig farmers or whatever it is, because they've figured out that that's their passion in life. It's wonderful. I think it's wonderful.
well, and then you're kind of emerging back into it now with these kind of maybe new tools or something, a little bit more self-awareness.
What I did in the pandemic, I thought, I don't know how long is this going to last, but I need to make sure that I don't forget to practice, because if I don't have a deadline or something coming up, suddenly I'll realize 2 weeks have gone past and I've been reading or whatever. And so I set myself an alarm. My phone is full of alarms that go off for different things, but so 11 o'clock every day, I practiced for an hour, and I didn't care whether I wanted to or not. That's what I did. And I practiced with a metronome for about 6 months every day. And it was extraordinary how that changed my playing. It tightened me up because I'm a very emotive player and I go with the flow. But you have to remember that sometimes you have to walk as well. That heartbeat is really important, as well as the river. Yeah, and when you're playing with other musicians, it's really easy. It's a lazy way of relying on the other musicians to keep you in time. So I sorted that bit of me, which was great.
As someone who was so busy performing prior to the pandemic, how did you deal with the isolation?
Well, I play because I live with my husband, obviously, he's a musician, so we got to play, and we did some live streaming, but our internet wasn't good enough, so we gave up on that. But then I got a phone call from a friend of mine, Georgia Hathaway, who's a fiddle player, who said, "I really need to play with people." And I was thinking, who would I like to jam with? And so I thought I'd really like to jam with my favourite people in the world are you and Leah Kirsten and Marta Solek. Do you want to meet us in the park and have a jam session? Like, sure. So I drove down to Toronto and we met on a bandstand, and we were all masked and miles away from each other because it was the time of terror. and we had this amazing jam. And then a film company came along they happened to be filming the 100th anniversary of this particular park, and they were interviewing people who used it. They came up and said, "Can we film you using this park?" I said, "Sure." And they said, "What's your band called? And can we book you for the launch of the of the documentary?" I was like, "Whoa, this is all very sudden." It was like speed dating. So what we found interesting was that four of us were all non-male. And what was really interesting is that we were all, as we were jamming with just tunes and improvisation, we were all waiting for somebody else to take the lead, and then realized that none of us were taking the lead because all of us are so used to supporting other musicians on the stage that we didn't come forward. And it was a real eye-opener for us. So it was amazing. Anyway, so Medusa was formed, and it's a phenomenal creative group of individuals who are very happy to improvise, happy to take tunes sideways as far as they'll go, and make wonderful, beautiful and ugly sounds and be just into the music. And now I'm on tour with them, and somebody gifted us money to make an EP. So we've just done that. We've just had it mastered, and it's in May coming out. And I feel very grateful to be in this new extraordinary creative group. It's just exciting, so exciting.
Well, you know, it's got to be good when you get a gig offer at your first jam, your first rehearsal.
Yeah, it's like everything's just plopped into place. It's very interesting.
You were the first person that I ever followed on TikTok.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Went on it and like looked up like fiddle, and like the first person that came up was you, and you've got a pretty sweet following and like some pretty amazing engagement on there. Was that a part of that practice schedule, or how did you come to find that online community?
So, well, my kids kept saying, "Mum, you've got to join TikTok. You have to join TikTok. You'll love it." And I said, "Oh no, I'm not doing TikTok. It's for young people to do stupid dances, blah blah blah." Okay. They kept pressuring me. So in the pandemic, I got into it and discovered the musician community there, which is extraordinary. And it was a real way of connecting with people other than my family